There are roughly 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. 2 trillion, each one containing hundreds of billions of stars, and around a huge number of those stars, planets, worlds with rock and water and atmosphere and chemistry. When you actually sit with that number, when you let it breathe, the logical conclusion feels obvious. We cannot possibly be the only ones here. The math alone seems to scream that life should be everywhere, that the cosmos should be loud and crowded and overflowing with signals we haven't even learned how to read yet. And yet, when we point our instruments at the sky, we get nothing. No signals, no visitors, no response, just a silence so deep and so total that it starts to feel less like an absence and more like an answer. That tension between a universe that looks perfectly built for life and a universe that behaves as if nothing else is alive in it is one of the oldest unsolved problems in science. The physicist Enrico Fermi put it simply back in 1950. If intelligent life is even remotely probable, and the universe is this old and this enormous, then where is everybody? That question became known as the Fermi Paradox. And for decades it sat in the background of science. Fascinating, but mostly unanswerable, because we simply didn't have the tools to test it properly. We were guessing. We were extrapolating from a sample size of 1, our own pale blue dot, and hoping the logic held. But now we have something we never had before. We have the James Webb Space Telescope. And what it is finding is not just filling in gaps in our knowledge, it is tearing holes in assumptions we didn't even realize we were making. Most people think of Webb as a camera. An extraordinarily expensive, extraordinarily powerful camera that takes breathtaking images of nebulae and distant galaxies for screensavers and magazine covers. And yes, it does that. But that framing completely misses what the telescope is actually doing. Webb is a time machine and a chemistry lab simultaneously. It can look so far back into the universe's history that it is literally seeing light that left its source before our planet existed. And while it is doing that, it is also dissecting the chemical fingerprints hidden inside that ancient light, telling us what those distant places are made of, what conditions exist there, and critically, whether those conditions could support biology. That is where things start to get deeply uncomfortable. Because what Webb is finding is pushing in 2 directions at once, and those directions are pointing away from each other. On one side, the telescope is revealing a universe that looks far more hospitable to life than we ever expected. More planets, more chemistry, more raw ingredients scattered further back in time than our models ever predicted. The conditions for life appear to be older, more widespread, and more common than the most optimistic scientists dared to assume a decade ago. That should be thrilling news, and in a way it is. But it also means the Fermi Paradox just got heavier. If the universe is even more capable of producing life than we thought, then the silence becomes even harder to explain. Every new discovery that makes life seem more plausible is also a discovery that makes the emptiness of the sky more baffling. So the question we are going to chase through this entire conversation is a simple but brutal one. Is James Webb making it more likely that intelligent life exists somewhere out there, while simultaneously making it more mysterious that we have never heard from any of it? Here is how we are going to get there. We are going to look at what the telescope is actually finding, not the beautiful pictures, but the data underneath them. We are going to walk through what those findings mean for the chances of life emerging across the cosmos. And then we are going to turn back toward that silence and ask whether the new evidence helps explain it, or whether it makes the paradox so sharp it starts to feel like a warning. Because there is a version of this story where the universe's emptiness isn't a mystery at all. There is a version where it is a message. We just haven't figured out whether we want to hear what it is saying. That is where we are headed. Let's start with what Webb is actually seeing out there. So let's make sure we are starting from the same place. Because the Fermi paradox gets misrepresented constantly. People reduce it to a question about alien contact. They frame it as, why haven't the little green men shown up yet? And that framing makes it sound like a fringe obsession, a topic for science fiction fans and late-night radio shows. But that is not what the paradox is actually about. Strip away the cultural noise, and what you have left is a cold, precise problem in probability, time, and the mathematics of a universe that is almost incomprehensibly large and almost incomprehensibly old. Here is the raw version of the problem. There are hundreds of billions of stars in our galaxy alone. The majority of those stars have planets. Many of those planets sit in zones where liquid water is possible. The universe is roughly 13.8 billion years old. Earth formed about 4.5 billion years ago. Life appeared here within a few 100 million years of the planet cooling down. Intelligent life capable of building technology showed up only recently, but it showed up. So if you run that chain of logic outward, the conclusion feels forced on you. Given the numbers, given the timescales, given the sheer volume of opportunity the cosmos has had to roll the dice, there should be others. Not just microbes, not just algae, others who built things, others who figured out physics, others who looked up at their sky and wondered the same things we are wondering right now. And yet, the sky is silent. That is the paradox. Not a riddle about little green men. A hard mathematical tension between what the numbers say should exist and what our instruments actually find. Now, here is where people get sloppy, and it matters enormously. They lump everything together under the word life as if it is one single thing with one single probability. It is not. There are at least three very different questions buried inside that one word, and each one has a completely different answer. The first question is whether simple life emerges. Single cells, microbes, chemistry that crosses the threshold from replication to metabolism. This might actually be common. The ingredients are everywhere. Water is everywhere. Carbon is the fourth most abundant element in the universe. The building blocks appear in interstellar clouds, in comets, on asteroids. Simple life might be a natural outcome of chemistry given enough time and the right conditions. The second question is whether complex life develops from that simple foundation. Multicellular organisms, animals, ecosystems. This jump took roughly 2 billion years on Earth, and it may have required a series of extraordinarily lucky accidents. A stable moon to regulate the tilt of the planet, a giant gas planet acting as a shield against asteroid bombardment, plate tectonics recycling nutrients. Each of these conditions narrows the field dramatically. Complex life might be far rarer than simple life, not by a little, but by orders of magnitude. The third question is whether complex life ever produces technological civilization. Creatures that not only exist, but invent, communicate across distances, and eventually reach the point where they can signal or travel beyond their home world. On Earth, complex animal life existed for hundreds of millions of years before anything built a radio transmitter. The specific chain of evolutionary pressures that produced a brain capable of abstract reasoning and tool use might be almost vanishingly unlikely even on a planet already crowded with complex organisms. This is why the Fermi Paradox can get worse from two completely opposite directions. If new data suggests that life's basic ingredients are everywhere and that habitable conditions are common, then the bar for simple life drops. More chances, more rolls of the dice, more opportunities for that first spark. And if life is easy to start, the silence gets louder, because it means there should be more complex life, more intelligent life, more civilizations broadcasting their existence into the dark. And we hear nothing. On the other hand, if new data suggests that even with all those ingredients and all those planets, something is still blocking the jump to intelligence or to civilization, then the paradox tightens from the other end. The universe might be full of dead chemistry and failed experiments, planets where life started and stalled, or where it flourished and then vanished before it ever learned to ask the question we are asking right now. So, when scientists and philosophers have tried to actually solve the paradox, they tend to fall into one of a few major camps. The first is that life itself is genuinely rare. The chemistry works in theory, but the actual probability of it spontaneously organizing is so low that even across trillions of planets and billions of years, it barely happens. We are a fluke. The second camp argues that life is common, but intelligence is rare. Microbes might fill the galaxy and we just cannot detect them. But the leap from a cell to a nervous system to a civilization is a lottery so brutal that almost nobody wins. The third possibility is that civilizations do emerge, and perhaps often, but they do not last. Something kills them. Physics, biology, their own technology, a limit written into the nature of progress itself. And the fourth is that we are simply looking the wrong way. We assume civilizations would communicate like we do, with radio waves and laser pulses and detectable heat signatures. But maybe advanced civilizations look nothing like what we expect. Maybe the signs are there and we are not sophisticated enough to read them yet. Each of these solutions implies something different about our future, and crucially, each one is being tested right now by a telescope orbiting 1 million miles from Earth, staring into the deep past of a universe that has never once written back. What Webb is finding in other solar systems is starting to pull some of these solutions apart. And what it is revealing is not exactly reassuring. Before Webb, exoplanets were essentially numbers on a spreadsheet. We knew they existed. We had catalogued thousands of them using the Kepler telescope and ground-based observatories. We had measured their sizes, estimated their masses, calculated their orbital distances, but they were still abstractions, points of light around other points of light. You could not look at them the way you look at a photograph and feel anything real. They were data. They were statistics. They were not worlds. Webb changed that. And the way it changed that matters enormously to the question of who else might be out there. The primary tool Webb uses to study other planets is called transit spectroscopy. When a planet passes in front of its star, a tiny fraction of the starlight filters through the planet's atmosphere before reaching us. Different molecules in that atmosphere absorb different wavelengths of light. Webb is sensitive enough to read those fingerprints. It can detect water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur compounds, and potentially much more complex chemistry from thousands of light years away. You are essentially tasting the atmosphere of another world by analyzing the light that passed through it. It is one of the most elegant techniques in all of science, and Webb is doing it better than anything we have ever built. Webb is also capable of direct imaging in certain cases, capturing actual light from planets themselves, rather than inferring their existence from a star's behavior. And it is analyzing the thermal signatures of planetary surfaces, mapping temperature variations, inferring geology, reading the energy budget of entire alien worlds. What it is finding is that planets are not simple. They are not just cold rocks or hot rocks or wet rocks. They are environments. They are systems. And the diversity is staggering in a way that should make you deeply uncomfortable if you think about the Fermi Paradox seriously. Take the early results on TRAPPIST-1, a red dwarf star with 7 rocky planets, several of which orbit in the habitable zone. Webb has been analyzing the atmospheres of these worlds with a precision that was simply impossible before. The data is still being interpreted and the picture is not fully clear yet. But what has already been ruled in and ruled out is reshaping our understanding of what these planets might actually be. Some appear to have retained at least some atmospheric chemistry. Others look stripped and bare. But the point is that we are no longer guessing. We are measuring. Real chemistry on real worlds around a real star 40 light years from your front door. Webb is finding water vapor in places it was not expected. It is finding carbon-based molecules in the atmospheres of gas giants far more complex than simple hydrogen and helium mixtures. It has detected sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere of a hot Jupiter in a way that tells us chemical processes there are active, dynamic, driven by energy. These are not static dead balls of gas. These are chemically alive environments, even if biologically empty as far as we can tell. And here is where the argument about habitability gets complicated in a way that matters. For decades, the popular framing was simple. Find an Earth-sized planet in the habitable zone, the band of distance from a star where liquid water could exist on the surface, and you have found a candidate for life. But Webb is showing us that this framing is far too narrow, because it turns out that what actually governs whether a world could support biology is not just size or distance. It is atmosphere, it is chemistry, it is geological activity, it is the interplay between a planet's interior and its surface and the radiation environment of its host star. A planet can sit perfectly in the habitable zone and have an atmosphere so thick with carbon dioxide that it is a pressure cooker, or it can orbit in that zone with essentially no atmosphere at all and freeze solid at night. The habitable zone is a starting point, not an answer. And Webb is giving us the tools to actually investigate what is inside that zone, rather than just counting planets that fall within it. This expansion in nuance is also an expansion in the catalogue of interesting candidates. Because a moon around a gas giant in the outer system with a subsurface ocean heated by tidal forces is now a serious candidate in a way it could not be verified before. A rogue planet drifting through interstellar space with a thick hydrogen atmosphere might retain enough internal heat to support liquid water for billions of years. The conditions we assumed were necessary keep getting revised as we discover that life, at least on Earth, finds ways into environments that should be impossible for it. And Webb is mapping more of these strange, unexpected environments than any instrument before it. What Webb is emphatically not doing is finding life. That needs to be said clearly. Every claim about biosignatures is currently tentative, heavily caveated, debated. A detection of a molecule that life might produce is not the same as a detection of life. Chemistry is not biology. The bar for claiming actual biological activity on another world is extraordinarily high, and we have not crossed it. But here is why the findings still make the Fermi Paradox worse. Much worse. Every time Webb reveals another world with atmospheric chemistry that does not immediately rule out habitability, it adds to the total count of places where the experiment of life could theoretically run. Every world with the right ingredients that turns out to be geologically active, chemically complex, and thermally stable is another location where, given enough time, the first cell might have had its chance. And the total number of those locations is growing faster than our ability to process what that means. The universe is not a sterile void punctuated by rare oases. It appears to be saturated with the ingredients and the conditions that we associate with the possibility of life. Which means the silence should not be this complete. The silence should not be this total. And the fact that it is tells you something is wrong with one of your assumptions. You just don't know yet which one. And now, we need to talk about time. Because the Fermi Paradox is not just a question of how many habitable worlds exist, it is a question of how long they have had to do something. You tend to picture the early universe as a primitive place, a thin soup of hydrogen and helium, a dark age. Then slowly, over billions of years, stars ignite, galaxies assemble, heavy elements build up, planets form, and only late in the story do you finally get complex chemistry and stable environments where life could run. That picture is comfortable, because it gives you a built-in excuse for the silence. If the universe stayed chemically poor and structurally chaotic for a long time, then maybe there simply hasn't been enough time. Maybe we are early. Maybe we are near the front edge of intelligence. Webb is making that excuse harder to hold. When Webb looks deep into space, it is not just looking far away. It is looking back in time. The light from those early galaxies has been traveling for more than 13 billion years to land on a detector you built with your hands. And in that ancient light, Webb is seeing galaxies that look wrong. Not impossible in a strict sense, but surprising enough that cosmologists have had to slow down and ask what assumptions are doing the work in the background. Some of these galaxies appear unexpectedly bright for their age. Brightness at those distances often implies lots of stars, and not just a few scattered pioneer stars, but huge populations packed into a relatively small volume. And when you translate bright and massive into the language of cosmic history, what it suggests is acceleration. Growth happening faster than the old mental timeline predicted. You expected baby galaxies, Webb is showing you adolescence with muscle. Now, to be clear, this is not a clean story with a single headline. These results are still being interpreted. There are debates about distances, about dust, about how we infer stellar masses from limited data, about whether some of the brightest candidates are being boosted by gravitational lensing, or whether the stellar populations are different than we assumed. This is the messy part of science where the instrument is new, the models are old, and everyone is arguing in public. But even with those caveats, the direction of the surprise is consistent. Too much structure too soon, too much light too early. And that matters for life because life is not just about water and a friendly temperature. Life is about chemistry that has had time to get interesting. The first stars were simple: hydrogen and helium collapsing into fusion. But the universe did not start with carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, silicon, phosphorus, iron. It had to manufacture them. It had to run furnaces. Stars had to live and die. Supernovae had to spray heavy elements into space. Then new generations of stars had to form from that enriched material. Then disks had to condense. Then planets had to accrete. Then you finally get rocky worlds with metal cores, magnetic fields, long-term geology, and the kind of complex surface chemistry that can host metabolism. On Earth, that chain took time. A lot of time. Not because it is the only way, but because it illustrates the bottlenecks. You need long-lived stars. You need stable planets. You need enough heavy elements to build not just rocks, but circuitry for chemistry, catalytic metals, mineral surfaces, and the molecular diversity that makes biology possible. So when Webb hints that galaxies and stars were maturing earlier than expected, the terrifying implication is not aliens confirmed. The terrifying implication is timeline. If some regions of the universe got their act together early, if they formed large stellar populations fast, enriched their interstellar medium fast, and built rocky planets sooner, then the clock for life could have started ticking earlier too. You might have been telling yourself that intelligent life is rare because it needs billions of years just to get a stable stage. But what if the stage existed sooner? What if there were neighborhoods of the cosmos where, while your patch of the universe was still figuring out how to assemble galaxies, theirs already had second-generation stars with metal-rich disks and terrestrial planets cooling into place? Because planet-friendly is not a single switch. It's a statistical environment. More metals generally means more solid material to form rocks. More rocks means more chances to make Earth-like planets. More Earth-like planets means more chances to run the same experiment that happened here. Chemistry trying random configurations for millions of years until something starts copying itself. And if those chances started earlier, then someone else could have had a head start that is not 1,000 years, not 1,000,000, but billions. Try to actually feel what a billion-year head start means. You are impressed by the last 200 years of human progress. Electricity, radio, antibiotics, rockets, computers, nuclear weapons, machine intelligence. All of that happened in a blink. Now stretch that blink into a geological epoch. Stretch it into the time between early multicellular life and you. Stretch it into the time it took Earth to go from algae to cities. If a civilization got going even 1 billion years before us, you are not talking about more advanced. You're talking about incomprehensible. You're talking about technologies that would look like physics violations to you, not because they break the laws, but because you don't understand how deep the laws go. You are the ant looking at a smartphone and trying to explain it as shiny rock magic. And this loops back to the Fermi Paradox with teeth. Because the paradox isn't just, where is everybody? It is, if anybody had enough time, why aren't they everywhere? A mature early universe means more time for expansion, more time for colonization, more time for self-replicating probes, more time for megastructures, more time for detectable footprints. It means more time for mistakes too. More time for civilizations to wipe themselves out. more time for predators to evolve, more time for whatever filters might exist to do their work. But either way, it tightens the logic. It reduces the number of excuses. Now, there is an important point here that you should not let your fear steamroll. Early galaxies do not automatically mean life began early. A galaxy full of stars can still be dead. Metal enrichment can be uneven. Early star formation can be violent, blasting planets with radiation and stripping atmospheres. Some stars die fast. Some regions are chaotic. And even on a perfect Earth-like world, biology may not be inevitable. It might be a freak accident. It might be the Rolex in the box. Webb is not showing us ancient cities. It is showing us ancient construction sites. It is showing us that the universe may have built the scaffolding earlier than we thought. That is all. But that all changes the priors. It shifts your default timeline. It whispers that the cosmic waiting room may have been open long before we walked in. That in some corners of the sky, the lights may have turned on and stayed on while Earth was still molten. So now ask yourself the version of the Fermi Paradox that Webb makes harder to dodge. If the universe had more time than we assumed, if there were more planet-friendly regions earlier than expected, if some civilizations had an immense head start, then why does the sky still look like a graveyard? And if it is a graveyard, what exactly killed them? Because whatever the answer is, it had more time to find us too. So far, Webb has been doing something subtle but devastating. It isn't handing you a single smoking gun. It's tightening a net. Because the old escape hatch for the Fermi Paradox was always the same story. Maybe Earth is rare because Earth-like planets are rare. Maybe stable stars are rare. Maybe heavy elements were rare for most of cosmic history. Maybe you needed a very specific galactic suburb with just the right calmness, just the right chemistry, just the right timing. Webb is not letting you relax into that story. Webb is looking at planet-forming disks and watching the ingredients move around. It is looking at exoplanet atmospheres and starting to measure what those worlds are actually made of, not what you hope they're made of. It is looking at small, cool stars that live for trillions of years and realizing that the universe is stuffed with long-lived furnaces that can keep a habitable zone warm for longer than Earth has existed. And the message that keeps leaking out of the data is not life is common. The message is more uncomfortable than that. The message is that the number of plausible settings where life could at least take a shot might be larger than your intuition wants. You used to think of habitability like a narrow bridge. One planet, one star type, one perfect orbit, one perfect atmosphere, a miracle. But habitability is starting to look less like a bridge and more like a landscape. There are more paths, more niches, more ways to not instantly die. A planet doesn't have to be an exact Earth clone to have liquid water somewhere. It can have a thick atmosphere and a different chemistry and still have stable temperatures. It can be a little larger, a little smaller, a little farther out, and still have regions that work. It can have water under ice. It can have oceans that are hidden but not absent. It can have energy sources that don't come from sunlight at all. Life does not need a postcard planet. It needs gradients. It needs chemistry that is forced out of equilibrium and kept there. It needs a battery. On Earth, that battery is sunlight and geology and the slow churn of a planet that refuses to settle down. But batteries come in many shapes. Now, layer that on top of the Webb timeline problem from the last section. If structure and metals and planet building could have started earlier in some regions, and if there are huge numbers of long-lived stars that can run the experiment for absurd lengths of time, then the number of lottery tickets might be enormous. And here is where the paradox shifts. It is no longer primarily a question of, are there places for life? It becomes a question of, if there were so many places, why don't we see the consequences? Because you are not asking for alien skyscrapers. You are not asking for a live broadcast. You are not asking for a flying saucer parked over your house. You are asking for leakage. Even a civilization that doesn't want to talk still has to obey thermodynamics. it still has to burn energy to do work. It still has to dump waste heat somewhere. It still has to live on a planet or around a star or in a habitat that interacts with its environment. A technological species is not a ghost. It is a heat engine with opinions. So as Webb sharpens the universe's census, more planets, more old systems, more time, more chemical richness, the silence stops feeling like a limitation of your instruments. It starts feeling like an absence that needs an explanation. And you can do the math without being an optimist. Take conservative assumptions, the kind that are almost pessimistic on purpose. Assume most planets are dead. Assume most habitable zones are hostile in ways we don't yet understand. Assume life is hard to start. Assume intelligence is rarer than life. Assume technology is rarer than intelligence. Assume most civilizations don't last long. Fine. Now multiply rare by a galaxy with hundreds of billions of stars, and then multiply that by a universe with hundreds of billions of galaxies, and then multiply that by billions of years of cosmic history, and then multiply that by stars that can stay stable for tens or hundreds of billions of years. Even if the probability is microscopic, the number of trials is obscene. It's like walking into a casino the size of a planet and being told that only one slot machine out of 1 trillion ever pays out. You would still expect to hear jackpots. You would still expect to see lights flashing somewhere. The building is too big, and it has been open too long. And if you don't see any jackpots, you stop blaming bad luck. You start suspecting the machines are rigged. This is where the great filter idea starts to feel less like a philosophical toy and more like a live wire. The great filter is the possibility that somewhere between dead rock and galaxy-spanning presence, there is a step that almost nobody gets past. The question is where? If habitable conditions are widespread, if the stage is not as rare as we hoped, then the filter might not be early. It might not be planets are rare. It might not be water is rare. It might not even be microbes are rare. It might be later. It might be the jump from chemistry to self-replication, or the jump from simple cells to complex cells, or the jump from complex cells to intelligence, or the jump from intelligence to technology that doesn't immediately commit suicide. And that last one should make you feel a very specific chill, because it points the filter at the part of the story we are currently living through. You are a civilization that has just learned to rearrange matter at the level of atoms and nuclei. You have built machines that can think faster than you. You have connected your entire species into one nervous system made of glass fibers and radio waves. You have started to alter your planet's climate without intending to. You are running a global experiment with no control group. If the universe is full of habitable worlds and still quiet, one interpretation is that a lot of biospheres never light the spark. Another interpretation is worse. A lot of biospheres might light it, and then the light goes out quickly. Webb doesn't prove that. Webb doesn't even measure that directly. But Webb changes how heavy that possibility feels, because it pressures the earlier excuses. When you had fewer planets and less time, you could place the great filter anywhere and sleep at night. Maybe we're just early. Maybe nobody else has had a chance. Maybe we're first. But if the universe built its scaffolding earlier, if there are more potential cradles than we assumed, and if those cradles have had billions of years to run the experiment, then we're first becomes harder to defend. Not impossible, just harder. And the silence stops being a shrug. It becomes a clue, not a clue that says aliens exist. A clue that says something about the transition from life to loudness is rare. Because notice what's missing from the sky. It isn't just radio messages. It's not just friendly beacons. It's obvious, dumb, wasteful footprints. Industrial pollutants on a large scale. City heat levels of waste infrared. Stars being rearranged. Systems being harvested. The kind of cosmic vandalism that even a non-curious species would eventually stumble into if it kept growing. Webb is not just increasing the number of places where life could happen. It is increasing the number of places where, over enough time, something should have happened. And yet when you look up, you don't see a universe that looks developed. You see a universe that looks empty. That emptiness is starting to feel less like we haven't searched enough, and more like there is a rule here we don't understand. A rule that turns potential into silence. And once you accept that, the Fermi Paradox stops being a cute question. It becomes a diagnostic. It becomes the universe telling you that either life is far rarer than the growing list of habitable settings suggests, or that becoming detectable is more dangerous than you want to admit. And in the next step, we have to ask the question that follows from that. If the silence is real, what could still explain it without invoking monsters? And if it can't be explained cleanly, what kind of universe are we actually living in? So let's do the sane thing for a moment. Let's not jump straight to hunters and exterminators and cosmic traps. Let's ask a calmer question. If Webb is tightening the net, what are the remaining holes? What are the ways the universe could still be full of life and even full of intelligence, and still look dead from where you're standing? Start with the simplest possibility. Life might not be the bottleneck. Intelligence might be. It is very easy to picture a planet with oceans and chemistry and sunlight as a place that should produce minds. But you are smuggling in a human story. You are assuming evolution is aiming at brains. It isn't. Evolution is not a ladder. It is a drunk walk that happens to stay inside the walls of what survives. And what survives is usually the thing that is good enough, not the thing that is smartest. On Earth, for most of its history, life was not building civilizations. It was doing microbial paperwork. Single cells, biofilms, little chemical factories eating light and rock and each other. Then, multicellular life shows up, and it still doesn't sprint toward intelligence. It tries every weird body plan it can afford. It grows armor, it grows fins, it grows poison, it grows 1,000 ways to not get eaten. And even when you get big brains, you don't automatically get technology. Dolphins are intelligent, octopuses are intelligent, crows solve puzzles, none of them build radio telescopes. Not because they are lesser, because intelligence is not one thing, and because technology requires a very specific stack. Manipulators, long childhoods, social learning, stable environments, accessible energy, and a path that doesn't dead end. A planet can be full of minds and still never produce a single antenna. So the first clean explanation is this. The galaxy might be full of biology, even complex biology, even clever biology. But the jump to tool using, fire using, industry building intelligence might be the freak event. Not life, not microbes, not even animals. Just that narrow slice of evolution that produces a species that can turn physics into leverage. And even if that jump happens, it might not stick. Because the next possibility is that intelligence is a short-lived phase. You look at your own species and you feel momentum. You feel like the future is automatically bigger than the past. More cities, more machines, more reach. But that feeling is just your timeline bias. You are standing inside the one story that didn't end yet. Zoom out and think like the universe. A technological civilization is a chemical reaction happening on the surface of a planet. It burns through concentrated energy. It rearranges its environment. It builds power. It builds risk. And the risk scales faster than the wisdom. There are a lot of ways to end a technological phase without any aliens involved. Runaway climate change, resource collapse, engineered pathogens, nuclear war, unaligned machine intelligence, a simple cascade of bad incentives that no individual can stop. And here is the brutal point. You don't need everyone to self-destruct. You just need most of them to. If 99% of technological civilizations flame out within a few thousand years, the universe can be full of attempted civilizations and still look quiet. Because the window where they leak obvious signals is short. It's a spark, not a lighthouse. And you can make it even quieter. Because maybe the ones that survive learn something quickly. Expansion is not automatically optimal. You assume that if a species gets technology, it will spread, colonize, fill the galaxy, build Dyson swarms, rearrange stars, leave footprints you can spot from across the void. But why would it? That is a very human assumption, born from a species that evolved in scarcity on a planet where space is limited and other tribes compete for the same land. You grew up in a world where more was a survival strategy. An advanced civilization might not have that psychology, or it might outgrow it. If you can build perfect virtual worlds, why colonize harsh real ones? If you can engineer abundance locally, why gamble on interstellar projects that take centuries and can fail? If you can upload minds, slow, subjective time, and live 1,000,000 lifetimes inside a habitat the size of a small moon, expansion stops being an instinct and becomes a hobby. And hobbies don't reshape galaxies. This is the self-limiting hypothesis. Not everyone becomes a space empire. Some become monks, some become gardeners, some become curators of a single system. Some decide that exponential growth is a cancer, not a destiny. You might hate that answer because it sounds like a cop-out. But notice what it does. It breaks the automatic link between intelligence exists and we should see megastructures. Now add another layer. Even if civilizations expand, they might still be hard to detect because we are looking for the wrong kind of noise. You attune to 20th century leakage, radio, radar, industrial pollution, waste heat that looks like a city turned inside out. But a civilization that is older than us by 10,000 years might have gone past that phase the way you went past open fires in caves. They might communicate with tight beams, not broadcasts, lasers, not radio, quantum links, not omnidirectional shouting. They might use frequencies and schemes that look like background to us, or that are deliberately indistinguishable from natural processes. They might bury computation in cold places to minimize waste heat, because in physics, heat is not just waste. Heat is evidence. And if you live in a universe where being noticed has a cost, you optimize for invisibility. Not because you are evil, because you are competent. You can even imagine a civilization that looks like nothing. Distributed probes, low-power sensors, small machines drifting through interstellar space like spores. No cities, no giant signatures, just quiet intelligence, harvesting information, nudging things occasionally, and never lighting up the sky. That is the disturbing twist. The galaxy could be full of activity that is optimized not to look like activity. And now, we have to admit something uncomfortable about Webb itself. Webb is incredible, but it is not omniscient. It is not reading license plates on exoplanets. It is not watching alien traffic. Most of what Webb can do with atmospheres is limited to the big, puffy planets that are easiest to measure, and to the fraction of systems aligned just right for transits. For Earth-like worlds, the signals are tiny, 1 part in 10,000, 1 part in 1,000,000, and clouds can hide everything. Hazes can flatten spectra. A biosphere could be there and your instruments would see a blur. Even the waste heat argument has limits. Waste heat is easiest to see when it is extreme, when a civilization is basically turning starlight into industry at scale. But if they are efficient, if they are cold, if they are sparse, their footprint could sit below our detection threshold and look like ordinary dust. So another clean explanation is observational humility. The universe might not be empty. We might just be blind in very specific ways. And finally, there is the possibility that the paradox is partly a framing problem. Where is everybody assumes everybody would be recognizable to you. It assumes aliens build things that look like technology to human eyes, that they value expansion, that they leave heat signatures in the bands we check, that they exist on planets rather than in oceans or atmospheres or artificial habitats, that they operate on timescales that overlap ours, that they care to interact with the outside universe at all. But what if intelligence is mostly quiet by nature? What if it tends toward inward worlds, not outward empires? What if the dominant mode of advanced life is contemplation, not construction? What if what you call a civilization is, in most cases, a brief transitional fever before a species stabilizes into something that doesn't need to shout? In that framing, the silence is not necessarily a cemetery. It might be a library with the lights off. None of these explanations require monsters. None of them require a cosmic war. They only require you to let go of the assumption that your trajectory is universal. But here is the catch. Each gentle explanation buys you some quiet, not infinite quiet. It can reduce the number of loud civilizations. It can shrink the window of detectability. It can hide the signatures. It can make the silence less paradoxical. But it doesn't make it disappear. Because the universe is still enormous, the timescales are still obscene, and if even a tiny fraction of civilizations ever choose to be loud, ever choose to expand, ever choose to build big, wasteful, visible structures, then over billions of years you would expect at least some cosmic graffiti. So yes, there are clean ways to explain the silence. Life might stall, intelligence might be rare, technology might be brief, survivors might go quiet, our instruments might be missing the signal, our expectations might be anthropocentric. All of that can be true. And if you stack those possibilities together, the quiet sky becomes less like a scream and more like an unanswered question. But now you're standing at the edge of the next section. Because if the clean explanations don't fully cover the silence, if Webb keeps tightening the net, then what's left on the table are not just biological filters and sociological choices. What's left are the darker and stranger possibilities, not just about aliens, about the universe itself. So let's step over that edge, because when you run out of ordinary explanations, you don't get comfort, you get possibility space, and the universe has had 13.8 billion years to explore it. Here is what James Webb is doing to your intuition. On one hand, it is making the cosmos look more capable of hosting life. It's finding complex chemistry where we weren't sure it could exist. It's pushing habitable zone thinking out from a few lucky rocks to entire architectures of worlds. It's showing us that planet formation is common and fast, that disks are everywhere, that the raw ingredients are not rare treasures. And then it looks deeper, toward the early universe, and it sees structures that look too mature, too organized, too soon, as if the universe got good at building things faster than our models expected. More planets, more chemistry, more time, more chances. And yet, on the other hand, the sky is still quiet. The more Webb expands the catalogue of places where life could be, the stranger it becomes that we don't see the fingerprints of anyone who actually is. It's like walking into a city the size of a continent, with endless apartment buildings, the lights all wired, the water running, the air breathable, and not one window has a silhouette. Not one radio is playing, not one exhaust vent is warm. If the stage is this big, why does it feel like the play never starts? So now we talk about the interpretations that people avoid saying out loud. Not because they're proven, because they are coherent, because they fit the data as well as the hopeful stories do, and because they make you feel the floor drop out under the human narrative. First, maybe we are early. Not special early. Not chosen early. Just early the way the first bacteria were early in Earth's oceans. Early the way the first sparks were early in a forest that hasn't dried out yet. You look at the universe and you imagine a long parade of civilizations behind us. Ancient empires, billion-year minds, libraries built around stars. But what if the parade hasn't happened yet? What if the universe has only recently become meaningfully habitable on a large scale? Not because planets didn't exist, but because the chemistry wasn't friendly enough. Early stars were metal poor, radiation was harsher, catastrophes were more frequent. Maybe the universe had to age into stability. Maybe it had to cook heavier elements into circulation. Maybe it had to calm down. In that story, the silence is not a graveyard. It's a dawn. And that sounds comforting until you realize what it implies. If we are early, then there is no one ahead of us to warn us. No older species that already mapped the minefield of intelligence. No cosmic big brother that learned the rules and left guideposts. We are not missing the party. We might be the match that decides whether the party is even possible. Second, maybe intelligence is fragile in a way we don't want to admit. Not just politically fragile, not just one bad decade away from collapse. Fragile in the sense that it might be a narrow peak in an evolutionary landscape surrounded by cliffs. A technological civilization is a system that can amplify itself. It can turn ideas into machines, machines into power, power into speed. But that same amplification applies to errors. You can build medicine. You can also build engineered pathogens. You can build energy. You can also build weapons. You can build